Hi, I'm Gina-R-Farrar, reinvention coach, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap podcast, and leader of this amazing global community of women. If you are approaching midlife or are already in the thick of it, welcome home. Please grab a cup of something wonderful and join me for some real talk, practical strategies, and a big dose of sisterhood. I am so glad you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife and to live a more vibrant second half. Today, we're going to be talking about codependency. Now, codependency is thought to be a predominantly female tendency. And my guest today, her goal is to help women find balance in giving and receiving. My guest is Mary-Joye. She's a licensed therapist and the author of Codependent Discovery and Recovery 2.0, a holistic approach to healing and freeing yourself. Mary, thank you so much for being on my show today.
Thank you for inviting me, Gina, and I welcome everyone in your audience and hope I can be of service to them today.
You know, I'm excited to have you on and to have this conversation. I have not had this conversation yet. And the reason that I'm excited to have it is because I think a lot of us as women, we're born nurturers, we're born givers, we're born doers. And sometimes it goes off the rails and ends up in that codependent, field. And we find ourselves being very frustrated and not understanding why things are out of balance. So I thought, how great to have you come along and give us a little bit of perspective and some strategies. So why don't you tell us a little bit, Mary, about why this mission and message? What led you to this?
Well, I am a recovered codependent. And when someone told me I was one, I was 45 years old, probably 46 or 7, ready to go into my internship in counseling at a drug and alcohol rehab. And my professor called me up after class, which is never a good thing, even when you're in midlife. And she was a little bit older than me, but not much. And she told me to come after class, just like a little school kid. I walked up there. It was as if I was 10 years old again. And she said, "You're codependent." And I said, "What's that?" I didn't even know what it was. And she said, "It takes one to know one. I'm the child of an alcoholic, and you're the child of a psychiatrist, and they're going to eat you alive in rehab if I don't get a grip on your codependency." So I had to learn what it was and what it wasn't, which may help your listeners to know. It's just in brief, codependency is just giving until you give out, or that you lose yourself caring for others. It's out of balance giving. It's a compassion that turns to compulsion to help people. And it can be very damaging, especially in midlife when you're just, winding down, wearing out. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. So that's how I came to it. And I had to reinvent later in life. And it's a daily process. It's a lot like addiction. You get dopamine from helping people. So you have to, I went to a neuropsychologist as an internship later. And then I went to an addiction specialist to cure me of my codependency. And there is no cure. There's just a process of staying in balance. So we're all works in progress.
That's interesting. So you said it's giving until you give out. And what else is it?
Well, it's losing yourself caring for others.
That was it. Losing yourself caring for others. And isn't it interesting? You use the word addiction.
Yes.
I think
yes.
Powerful because that sort of explains the loop that we get ourselves in.
Yes. It also explains battered woman syndrome of I have to stay, I must stay, or I can't just leave, or the excuses that we give, because it is like an addiction. The trauma bonds are very strong when someone's codependent. They stay in those we call them intermittent reinforcement relationships, where somebody's really nice, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. The narcissist codependent dance is very well choreographed. And the codependent is driven by a fear of abandonment. And the narcissist is driven by a fear of abandonment, but they manifest in different ways. So very good to know for anyone who may be listening that has that dynamic going on right now. I did for a long time. That is why I went on a quest, and it started with a bunch of questions. So maybe you have questions for me about that can help people out there that are your listeners.
You mentioned trauma bonds. Let's talk a little bit about that for someone who this might be new languaging for them.
Yes.
And because trauma bonds can start in childhood, and a lot of times they do, right? We tend to think of the relationship we're in being the problem. But the reason it's so darn complicated is because there's this thing, especially in your midlife, you're talking 40, 50, 60 years back.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about trauma bonds and the role they play.
Thank you, Gina, because there is in the book I wrote a whole chapter on your family roots. And I have a little sense of humor. It's a very dark subject, but I try to bring some levity to it. And I said, your family is not Las Vegas. What stays in your family does not have to stay in your family, because it's when we keep these family secrets, we take on the shame of the perpetrator. And who do children that are molested or beaten or have an alcoholic parent, or even a parent who's absent, they make excuses as a child and they learn to do this as an adult, and they're not making the connection between their past and their present, and they carry it into the future. And in doing so, wow, do we have a dynamic, and it can create, as the severity in childhood can create that trauma bond in adulthood, because you have a parent who loves you and nurtures you, and then also is the one who's harming you. You may have a wonderful parent, but when they're drunk, they're not there anymore. Or you may have an abusive parent. So the very, very person you look to for your caregiver is the person who's hurting you. And it's a lot like a Stockholm syndrome. So it isn't just psychological, it's physiological. Little children internalize that. We have something called a vagus nerve, and that reactivity, it's in your face, your throat, goes down your body into your stomach. And when a person is in a trauma bond and they think about leaving, they get extremely anxious. Like, I can't live without that person. I can't do it. And I've been there. I know what that feels like, but you can. It's just the trauma bond lying to you. It feels like love, but it's a trauma bond. And hopefully that explained it. There is physiology to it. Like the fight, flight, and frozen. You get a lot of physiological reactivity to a trauma bond.
In my personal experience, it's that part of the body that trauma sat.
Yes.
So there's a part of my body, if something triggers that specific emotional trauma.
Yes.
That part of my body was actually where I felt it.
Yes. And I tell people to pay attention to the tension. This is why I went to a medical doctor who could explain to me neuroscience. I didn't even know what a vagus nerve was when I went to school. I mean, no shame on my school. If I had a PhD in psychology, they probably mentioned the vagus nerve, but it's fairly new research on how much that nerve creates all this reactivity, and it's subconscious. But when you're conscious of your subconscious, you can recognize and neutralize those triggers immediately and just stop them. But you have to know, oh, that's my childhood talking. I don't want to bake 100 pies for a church social or for my best friend's wedding. I can't, but I feel like I should, and I must, and I have to. But you stop yourself going, well, it feels like I should, but I don't have to do it.
And along with that, I hear, I'm not a good friend if I don't. I'm not
Correct.
a good fill in the blank if I don't do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes we don't even need other people to beat us over the head. I think we do such a good job by ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, the codependent beats themselves up more than anyone. Absolutely. They, I coulda, shoulda, woulda. I must, I need to, I have to, I ought to. There was a very famous psychologist in the old days named Albert Ellis, and I loved him. People in my class did not understand why I loved him so much. He's kind of like, if Larry David were a therapist, it would be Albert Ellis. So I liked his approach. It's called rational emotive behavioral therapy. And he said people came to him with neurosis because shoulds, coulds, have to, must, ought to, need tos. And I said, oh my gosh, that would be exactly me. You have this thing in your head that said, I must get a present for someone who's mean to me and never says thank you. I must do that because they won't like me anymore. This is what a codependent thinks. Someone is terrible to you, is an awful friend, never shows up, but you must get them that $100 gift from Neiman Marcus, or you're not a good friend to them. And maybe they won't like you anymore, but it's not a good relationship. We've all done it.
Yeah. And where is that line between, doing something because you want to and doing something because you feel compelled to?
Well, I tell you that what you just said about you feel it in your body, because that, I had a dynamic as a child, and, I was abused in several ways as a child. Many of your listeners can probably relate to that. And please do the work to heal from that. And then this will be like work that you need to do amongst that, but you pay attention to where that is in your body. So if somebody asks you to do something, you have that knee-jerk, well, sure. And you go, oh, wait a minute, I don't really want to. And you have that jolt in your stomach. Some people, it's their heart. For me, it's my lungs. It gets me in my chest. I can just feel my chest tighten. And when I notice that, I stop and I go, well, let me think about it. If you are cheerful doing something and it's something that you want to do instead of feel that you have to do, that's where you draw the line. And you can notice that in your body, not in your mind, in your body. Or you feel tense and tight and terrible. That's not cheerful giving. That's a compulsion.
So you're pretty much learning yourself.
Yes.
You have to be your own student.
Yes. As I call codependency, narcissism in reverse. Absolutely. Because a narcissist is hyper-focused on themselves and a codependent is hyper-focused on everybody else. And this is why narcissists can say no and yes so readily and easily, because they know what they want, they know what they don't want, and they don't have any trouble telling you. I'm not telling people to turn into a narcissist. In fact, in treatment, when people come to me, usually, and I don't tell them this up front, but usually they'll come to me and somewhere right at the tipping scale of the therapy making a difference, they'll say, oh my gosh, now I feel like the narcissist. I feel so selfish. And I go, good. That is not selfishness. You've just learned self-care and it's so foreign to you. You feel like the narcissist. I know that is the tipping scale, because you have to go from one extreme to the other to find balance. And that's when I know, good. So they're always surprised to hear that's a good thing, because they always come in ashamed of that. And I'm like, no. Narcissists don't call themselves narcissists. They don't. They don't. So yes, they've learned self-care.
It's such a fascinating thing how impacted we are in those early years of our life, and how that has such power in our lives going forward.
Yes.
And a lot of us don't really come to this reality until somewhere around midlife. There's like this, all of the changes that are happening and all of the shifts that we feel at this season of life, whether it's our kids growing up, if you have children, if your marriage is struggling because it's getting dull, or your job is changing because you're getting to that point where you're either redundant or you're tired of your job. I mean, there's so many things, aging parents and changing bodies. And we really do get to that point where everything can feel dissatisfying. And I think sometimes that's what wakes us up.
Absolutely. That's exactly what woke me up. It's exactly when I really started getting true help. You mentioned about taking care of parents. I came home, I was a songwriter in Nashville, and I was working at a major corporation and they sold to another major corporation. And I call that the merge and purge, which that they clean house. That's okay. Cause I knew I needed to reinvent. I knew I was grateful I lasted that long in that industry. So I had no problem with that. But in reinventing, I had to take a sidestep because both of my parents were ill. So I had to come back to Florida, which I swore I'd never do. Don't swear things you'll never do, because you'll end up doing them. And there I was at the source of taking care of the people who fully admitted, they admitted it, that they didn't take care of me as well as they could have. Now, a village did raise me. I think it does take a village to raise a child. And I had wonderful people in my life. But when you have to take care of parents, when your job is giving you stress, when you have children, grandchildren, parents, all this to take care of all at once, it really comes down on you in midlife. And then you just get tired. Some people are retired, but you have to get tired before you retire, right? That's what I say. Some people are retired. I'm just tired sometimes. But I love what I do because I'm saving people from suffering like I did, but they're learning their own way. They get very reticent when I first start, because I will begin rather early in a session to ask about their childhood. And they think it has nothing to do with their narcissistic husband who won't take out the trash and refuses to cook or clean. Like, no, this has everything to do. They were usually the family Cinderella, or the boys could not pick up the room and the girls had to, or vice versa. There are many male codependents. I work with them too. And there's a lot of financial aspects to codependency as well. So I tell them we're going to make connections between the past and the present so you can navigate a better future. It's kind of like a compass for me. I got to have that compass in my hand to know where it's going to manifest in their adult life.
The question begs to be asked then, if somebody is hearing themselves in this conversation, how do they know that they're really falling on the codependent side? Because I think we all do overstep our own bounds.
Yes.
Time to time.
Well, they're in the book, and I call it the Spectrum of CoDependency, and it may be more helpful to help people understand it. They're somewhere between a doormat and an interventionist, a nagging person. Those are both codependents, because at the core of them are people who want to be so good for everyone else, they neglect themselves. Like the doormat will just say, I'll do whatever you want. And the nagging type will say, you're going to do what I want because you need to go to rehab, or you need to lose weight, or you need to exercise, or you need to do this. They tell you what you need to do, or they give a lot of unsolicited advice and get angry if people don't take it. You know, as a counselor, they spend 3 years in school teaching us not to just flat out give advice, because people need to come to their own conclusions. So a codependent will get stuck in between some of those, or even vacillate between those. So yes, it's difficult to know when you're doing it, but if you feel like a doormat, or you feel like everybody's telling you, stop being so controlling, stop and think about your motives and your intention. If your intention is to stay connected to people and in relationships that are toxic, you might be codependent. If you're truly genuinely helping, or someone asked you for advice, or someone asked you to help them, or you really do feel like you need to take a step down so you can help someone up occasionally, that's fine. But if you're always taking the fall, or you're always on the offense or defense trying to control people, check your intentions and motives to see if it's to stay connected to people.
You said taking the offense or defensive position.
Yes.
It's interesting. So the offensive would be the one that's telling everybody what to do.
Oh, yes. You need to go to rehab. Well, good luck with that, because if people don't want to get help, they're not going to get help. They're not. They're just not going to do it. I'll just give you a real life example, or a practical example. If a codependent says, I wish you'd go to rehab, and when you're ready, I will help you, that is not codependent. That is not holding the person accountable. That's holding the person responsible. You can even say things that are genuine, like, this isn't who you are. You don't want to be a drug addict. You don't want to be an alcoholic. When you're ready for help, I'm here to help you. Until you are, I'll leave you alone. And it's hard to do. But if you keep nagging that person, there's a thing in our brain called reactance formation. And Gina, I can tell you, if I told you you could never eat a carrot again as long as you live, and you don't even like carrots, you're already thinking about eating one, right? That's what's wrong with nagging. Stop drinking. No, they'll just drink more. Or the doormat who just says, oh, it's okay if you drink the same thing. So there's balance. So a balanced answer would be, you don't put up with it. You can address it. You also don't force someone to get help, because that's trying to fix it. But a balanced person will learn to detach from that person's illness, because it is their illness, not yours. That's why they used to call it codependent, because someone was, that's an old term. That's why I called my book 2.0, dependent on a substance, and you're in a relationship with them. So you're codependent. Terrible way to call someone. It's another way to blame a victim. And I think women have just had about enough of that, haven't we? Absolutely. We've had enough of that. If you're not pouring liquor down your husband or partner's throat, then you're not responsible for their drinking or whatever they're doing. So it's a way to see that you need balance. You just tell them, when you're ready for help, I'll make sure you can get it. I'll help you get help, but you don't have to be the person who does the helping.
That's a good distinction. You can offer to be help when they're ready, but you don't have to actually be the engine behind it.
No, in fact, even I love our American Counseling Association and the Psychological and Psychiatric Association. you're not allowed to treat your family and friends in our profession. It's actually ethically unsound. In some states, it may even be considered illegal, but because the emotions you're too close to it. You can't possibly do that. It's just too close. You can be a friend, you can be a listening ear, but you are not allowed to treat people that you're in relationship with.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned neuroscience. I would like to spend a minute talking about how neuroscience applies to, or how it becomes part of the process of codependency. What role does neuroscience play?
Well, I'm a neuroscience geek. I wish I knew more. I study it all the time. And in the context of codependency, the reward centers of a codependent's brain light up when they give, like someone using cocaine. And that's, most people have some tendency to do that, unless they're sociopaths or narcissists, that they have no joy in giving. Most people do. Reward centers light up when we give. But boy, in a codependent brain, it really lights up, and you get dopamine and oxytocin, which is a trust hormone, and norepinephrine. You get this big rush of, aren't I wonderful? And, we hear it's more blessed to give than to receive. And it is, but you have to receive to give. You can't just keep giving and giving, because you will give out or burn out. So the neuroscience of that is you get a lot of chemicals that are good when you give, and you feel guilty when you don't, if you're codependent. So that releases all kinds of toxic chemicals, such as, adrenaline and cortisol, and, oh, I'm not giving, I'm anxious. You just get anxious. Oh my, I should have done that. I must do that. That's where all that anxiety comes in. If it produces anxiety for you to give, it may not be healthy giving.
So basically, we get flooded with feel-good hormones, even though we are going against our own, well, maybe where there should be boundaries. Maybe that's
Absolutely. Yes, my family, my first job out of college, I worked for KISS, believe it or not, for 3 years. And it was the perfect starter job for a codependent, because taking care of 4 rock stars was nothing compared to my family, because I had a psychiatrist for a dad. I could navigate very murky waters, and my mom was just bigger than life in every way. But to your point, when I would go into those situations, the neuroscience was I can handle this. I can handle this. I can handle this. And you really, really can't. I was so conditioned by repetition, and it is by repetition that you get unconditioned. So there's more neuroscience for you there.
Mm-hmm. It's the habit breaking and habit forming going both directions.
Yes, in opposite directions. I hope that answered your question.
Now, where does survival mode fit into this?
Oh, wow. Now that goes back to childhood. Very much so. Very, very much so. Or if you have been abused or battered early in your life in a relationship, you may have perfect parents and get involved with someone who's toxic for you. A lot of perfect parents, quote unquote, perfect parents, will tell people we must give everyone a chance. Everybody's worthy of love. That's fine, unless your kid falls in love with a sociopathic or narcissistic person. Then they get this dynamic of being harmed. So they get again, it's the trauma bond. And that trauma bond is very, very serious. Yes, I'm really, really, really telling people to worry about their childhoods. That stuff starts deep in childhood. Make connections, connect the dots between your past and your present. Is there anything similar? Like if your parents said, put that back, we can't afford it. Do you have money worries? If somebody asks you for money, if your parents always said, give, 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 and they said, you have to give break open your piggy bank and give to this cause or this purpose, and you find yourself giving all your money away as an adult, make that connection, make the connection. And if you feel tension at all, slow down. I'm not telling people to stop giving, just slow down, check your motives, intention, and your body tension, and see if you're giving or you're giving out.
Giving being the more balanced, and the giving out would be the trauma response.
Yes, because I remember when a long time ago, when I was on that KISS tour, I would look at my bills after Christmas, and it took me until June or July to pay them off. Not things for myself, mind you, No, not things for myself. My family was wealthy. I was not. I worked for KISS. I was just a kid. I was on a, they don't pay as much as you think they would. And I had to live in New York City. So I looked at my bills one time when I was older and I said, oh my gosh, I'm buying things at Neiman's and Saks Fifth Avenue, and I don't buy anything for myself in there. I bought my dad an $80 tie in 1980. I mean, wow, that's like a $250 tie now. And I didn't feel good if I didn't give what they could afford, but it wasn't what I could afford. And even my parents weren't actually teaching me that. I just learned it from them. I was role modeling that, oh, that's what they can afford. So that must be what I have to afford. Even those little subtle nuances are things you can pick up that, look at your checkbook. Sometimes that is a good indicator of where your codependency is. I have a whole chapter on financial aspects of codependency, also on a spectrum. They either have nothing or they give everything. They have nothing and they stay in toxic relationships because they can't get out, or they have everything and people use their money. So they'll stay in relationships with people they can control with their money. Very, very toxic situation.
It almost sounds like people feel needed and useful. So it gives them a sense of purpose, possibly.
Oh, yes. Which is not a bad thing. Everyone needs a sense of purpose.
Right.
But you have to self-care. You cannot care for others. And anyone who's out there who's a caregiver, and I have been one, they often pass away before the person they're caring for. We see this time and time and time again. That is why I went to an addictions counselor, because addiction is an illness that leads to death. That's what people don't understand about addiction, why they call it a disease and an illness. Codependency, which has never been formally brought into any diagnostic manual except under the heading of burnout, is not considered an illness, but it can certainly make you ill and it can make you give. And really, people with codependency tend to get very ill. They do not take care of themselves. They will not go to the doctor. They'll take everybody else to the doctor but themselves. And they don't often ask for help. I was one of them. And, I didn't ask for help. And finally, somebody says you need help. You notice it. If people notice you need help, notice that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Taking care of my parents. The receptionist at the emergency room asked me why I was there at midnight. She said, are you having an emergency? I said, no, my mother's in here. She goes, oh my gosh, you look horrible. And she handed me a brochure for home health care.
Oh my
She
God.
said, she said, you need help helping your parents. I said, no, I don't. I'm fine. And she said, go look in the mirror. You're white as a ghost. She said, you look, because I had a 2-hour drive to get to the emergency room. She said, it's 2:00 in the morning. This is where your parents are safe. We've got them. You don't need to come here. You stay home. We'll call you in the morning. That's why we didn't call you.
Oh, they were in the hospital and then you drove.
Yes. I mean, if a receptionist in a hospital knows your name, take note of that. Right? If the receptionist at the ER knows your name, you might want to pay attention to that too.
I think there's a fine line, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I feel like, having just done a lot for my mother-in-law who passed this year, she really actually was not capable of doing things. She didn't have the capacity. So there were a lot of things that I did as her, we always call it the medical power of attorney. So the medical caregiver, the one who took care of the doctors, the advocacy and all of those things, and checking in on her and making sure she was okay, because she wasn't really fully capable of taking good care of herself. And so I feel like there's a fine line, because sometimes when you caregive, you do have to go beyond maybe what you would prefer to do. So how do you know? I mean, I realize it's not a black and white issue. It's a lot of gray. But how do you know that you're going too far too long?
When you can't go anymore. And I love that you brought that up. It's a fine line. It's also a very blurry fine line. And in the book, I address the fact, I address it very early on. So I'm glad we addressed this today. Thank you for bringing that up. I address it and say, this is to help you understand there are some people you have to take care of. Elderly parents, children, You have to, you must, you need to. Everything Albert Ellis said is wrong when it comes to certain people in your life. That is when you give. And sometimes you will give out being a caregiver. But the blurry line is, where are other things extraneously in your life? Are you taking care of your parents and making sure that your friends are taken care of? And are you taking care of your parents and making sure you stay late at the office to do things that you really don't have to do? That's where you can start subtracting things from your life that you don't have to do and hone in on what you do need to do, because some things you do need to do. So yes, it is a very fine and blurry line. And people have to really, really get very introspective. And if you need help, like I took care of my parents a long time by myself. And then finally it became impossible because they were both immobile. So yes, I had to call for help. And there are so many resources out there I didn't even know about. Social services, things for free, because my parents went through all of their money paying for home health care. I mean, they went through everything very quickly. So I tell people that it's okay to care for your parents, but there's also things out there when they went through everything, when there was nothing left. That's when I found out everything. I said, oh my goodness, there were all these resources and I didn't even know it, because I thought I can do this myself. It's impossible sometimes, but hopefully that will help people know that I'm not telling you that you can't give. I'm not trying to change anyone's personality. Keep nurturing, but you have to take a break and nurture yourself.
Maybe that is the next thought to discuss is, how does one who is codependent, let's take the extreme version, where
the hardcore
one, how do we baby step them? How do we shift their mind enough to feel like maybe they deserve a day off? Because I think that's probably where the crux is. Their value is so caught up in the other person. It seems to me that they would feel like they don't deserve it. Like there's
absolutely. I was that person. Thank you, Gina. I was that person. I just happened to live my parents did, happened to live very close to Disney World. So when you said to help them take the day off, when you asked, how can you help them take a baby step to take the day off? I couldn't do that. Take a day off, 24 hours. Are you kidding? That was unheard of. I just couldn't. But one day I just knew, and I had my degree. I just wasn't working as a counselor yet. Like I said, I had to sidestep that, but I'm near Disney World, and there is a free part of Disney World for people who haven't been there. There's a marketplace, there's happy people. And I knew about the neuroscience, and I said, okay, I'm going to cheat on one end of where I need to go to my parents' house and cheat on the other. It felt like cheating to me, which it wasn't. And cheat on the other end where I was going home to my home to take care of everybody there. And I said, I'm going to go to Disney World for an hour. I just would go there for an hour and I would see healthy people doing healthy things with children laughing, where people weren't dying in hospital beds, to reset my brain. So I would hope that somebody listening, and I'm sure they are, you can't take a whole day off, but at least start with an hour. And then you'll realize you'll feel a little bit guilty, but you won't be guilty and exhausted. That 1 hour will recharge you. Then that'll go into 2 hours, and you'll just start stealing, and it won't be stealing or cheating. It'll feel like it. And then you'll start saying, okay, I do deserve this. There's servanthood and there's servitude, and you have to serve yourself. And I mean, the word deserve, it comes from that, being of service, but not just being in constant service. I mean, even this is why nurses and doctors have shifts. No one can be a 24/7. So to just start in increments, start small.
I love the comparison, the servanthood versus servitude.
Yes.
Because servanthood, I think, is more of a choice. It's more of a decision, and servitude is more of a burden.
Yes. And servitude is placed upon you, and servanthood is your purpose and passion. Like what we're doing right now is of being servanthood. We have come through things, and it's like I always say, my mess became a message. That's a very common thing that people that have gone through things say, my mess is my message. If people don't want to listen to it, that's okay. I don't have that need to fix. It's different. We're being of service. We're not in service, if that makes sense. We're not taking orders from anyone, Gina. Mm-hmm. We have a genuine passion, not a compulsion to help people, not suffer.
It's painful to let that role go for some people, isn't it?
Wow. I still have trouble.
I mean, because it's such a part of identity and
yes,
self-image, possibly self-esteem. Am I understanding it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you start setting boundaries, which are not about keeping people out, it's about keeping you safe. People don't go, oh, wow, you're finally getting boundaries. No, they push back. And when you get the pushback, then you go back to what you were, you revert back. So for the sake of the podcast, in case someone doesn't read the book, I'm going to give you what I think is the jewel out of it. Is I have a when all else fails, and it's way toward the end. It's not at the end, but it's way toward the end. I have a quick fix chapter for many behaviors, but then one of them is when all else fails, and it's not what you might think it is. I tell people, go back to how you were, go back to being exhausted, give till you give out, give all your money away, bail everybody out of jail, stay in toxic relationships. Gina, can you feel that in your body right now? The sinking feeling? Mm-hmm. And then I write, are you mad at me yet? I hope so, because that means you're ready. You're ready to heal. Mm-hmm. Yes. Because when people have the thought of staying just like they are, it's very frightening. So I try to be enlightening.
It's overwhelming when you get some perspective. Like, yes, you are overwhelmed, but I think it's like, that's where the addiction part is, right? If it's like that hustle nation sort of, but in a different way.
Yes. You're hustling for everybody but you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the value. I'm only worth what I'm doing for other people.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I had written songs. In fact, I should have recognized it much earlier in my life, because one of my publishers, and she was not codependent. Her name's Judy Harris. She's a great woman. And she said, I'm not cutting that song. That is a codependent anthem. I didn't even know what that meant. And she was right. Oh, I mean, some of it was, I'd lay down my life, surrender my soul, let go and let you take control just because you'd never asked me to. And I wrote that as the opposite of what my marriage was. And I thought that that's what I was saying. But no, she saw it differently. I'm glad she did. I'm glad she saw it for what it was. I'd go one step down to help you go one higher. I'd give up my deepest desires just because you'd never asked me to. Yeah, I wrote the opposite of what my marriage was, thinking that would be good. But still, what the codependent was in there, and she is a publisher, so she noticed it. And she knew the person I was married to, so she really noticed
it. Isn't it interesting how we're like water? We find our level.
Yes.
But the encouraging thing is we're not water. We can change our level.
Oh, Gina, I love that word. Thank you. Because that's what acquiesce means. The word acquiesce comes from water, from aqua, which is like the Latin kind of word for water. Codependents acquiesce their own life. They just go ahead and flow. They follow. They don't go with the flow, because I'm still a go with the flower, but not a follower. There's a big difference between someone who goes with the flow just out of genuine compassion for people, or who follows because they have to. You can't do what you want. We're going to go to dinner here. I always say this way you tell a codependent is say, where do you want to go for dinner? And I don't know, wherever, fill in the blank, wherever you want to go. That's what they mostly say. And I tell them, can you at least start with saying, I don't want to go to this kind of restaurant. I don't want. And my book is all about what you don't and do want. And it all culminates in that at the end of every chapter, what you don't want and what you do want. So every person that reads this is going to be writing their own self-help list at the end of it. It's not them listening to me. It's them listening to them, so they can find out what they don't want and what they do want. And you write it on the left and right, so you're only left with what's right, if that makes sense. That's what I had to do in my own life. So that I devised from my own experience of, okay, I don't know what I do want. I don't know who I am, but I know what I don't want. And I know who I'm not.
Mm-hmm. I've been accused of coming at life negatively. Now, I'm a positive person, so people say you're very positive, but the way I approach things is, well, I know what I don't want, and I know how I don't want things to be. And so I make decisions based on, well, what would give me the opposite of that?
Yes, that's deductive reasoning.
That's how I approach life. And if some entrepreneur thing is like, if you focus on the negative, but I'm like, I'm not focusing on the negative. I'm seeing the negative and going, I'm going to go, this is the positive version of that.
Absolutely. And when you're codependent, that's you have given yourself so much to others. That's where it's different. I know that there's a law of attraction stuff. I understand that. I'm not negating that by any means. And I am a more optimistic person, but what you're describing is what we call deductive reasoning, like subtract it. Because sometimes to know what you do want and focus on that, you have to say what you don't want. So I know they say don't focus on what you don't want, but boy, you sure have to embrace it. You really do. You have to embrace what you don't want so you know what you do want. And then at the end of the book, truly, I have them get rid of the left side of the list in ways that will serve them in their own way, but they don't keep them. They only keep the do want list. So then they are just focusing on, but yes, you're absolutely correct. If you don't know what you don't want sometimes, especially as a codependent, you will not be able to figure out what you do want.
Well, isn't it kind of a starting point, really?
Yes.
Because it lets you know what isn't right. And
absolutely.
And so the knowing what isn't right can help direct you to what is right.
Yes, that's not pessimistic. That's actually scientific reasoning. That is scientific reasoning. If this, then that. If not this, then that. There's a lot of science to that.
Well, it has served me well because it helped course correct. If it starts to look and sound and walk like a duck, it's like, okay, this is the wrong kind of familiar. And maybe that's a tool that a codependent can use, right?
Absolutely. And what's the root word of familiar? Because the brain seeks the familiar. Family. That's why those family roots, to bring this discussion full circle, those family roots, if something is familiar to you, your brain seeks it and it feels safe. You mistake history for safety. It's subconscious, mind you. Again, be conscious of your subconscious reactivity because it feels safe. When codependents come in my office and they say, I don't know who I am anymore and I don't know what I want anymore. I say, well, tell me what you don't want. Tell me what you do want. And that is exactly how I healed myself, with 2 lists. And one day I looked at one of my lists and I said, oh my gosh, that's what I really want. And I did start focusing on that and things started shifting, but not until I declared what I didn't want could I get to that place of what I did want, writing the opposite on the other side. So that healing technique, I'm sure other people have used it, but it came as exactly how I healed myself from things I pulled from therapy and from neuroscience and research and just going on a healing path.
And that's so hopeful because we don't have to stay beholden to those things. It is a lot of work to break those familial bonds in terms of the bondage bonds.
Yes.
Things that keep us locked into unhealthy behaviors and relationships. And I think as we come kind of full circle to the end of our conversation, that I would think that there might be some negative emotions in this process, guilt and shame, possibly. When
anxiety
begins to break those bonds.
Yes, exactly. That's that neuroscience part we talked about. That's why it's like addiction. You're going to have withdrawal symptoms, just like somebody stopping alcohol. But the beauty of it is, just like somebody who tells you they've been sober, they get clarity. So you're going to feel guilty, but you won't be guilty and exhausted. You're going to feel anxious, but you won't be anxious and exhausted. And then one day you reach that turning point and you go, oh, I have clarity now, because you'll be able to help somebody like really be there for them instead of feeling frustrated, angry, or upset. You kind of have to embrace the negativity and you replace it with positive thoughts and what you do want. And then it kind of erases itself, if that makes sense. You have to embrace it and then replace it. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. And then you kind of erase it that way. Your brain will help you erase it. It's repetition. It's reconditioning. I get caught all the time, every day in some codependent behavior. I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't go, there it was again.
And it's interesting because I would think that people would think codependent people are like mealy, doormatty, no opinion type person. But I think that it's just as easy to be a strong rescuer codependent. The one
yes.
everybody comes to. But, you might think codependent is this weakness, but I think there probably are those people. And the narcissists usually choose those people.
Yes, they do. Gina, you've done a lot of work. They do. They choose the fiercely independent. They're a challenge. That fiercely independent woman will give you all her money. I was one for a while, and then I became the doormat. I will tell you, you can be fiercely independent, get used that way, and then all of a sudden you slip into this role. And I left that marriage simply because they covered it, magazine, but this they didn't say, and I wish they did. I looked in the mirror one day and I said, it's not about him. I don't like who I am. Who is this scared little bunny rabbit? I put myself through college as a stagehand. I worked for rock stars. It was like, I just felt like Tina Turner with 32 cents. I said, I have to develop an exit strategy, and it caused withdrawals. I made mistakes. It was awful. It was an exit strategy and a long process. And the whole reason I wrote this is so people hopefully do not have to go through as long a process as I did. And you will regress occasionally. Like I said, I still do. I think every alcoholic has that time they walk by a bar and just wishes they had I can have just one. You kind of can't, but you will slip up, and, relapse is part of the progress and process. So I hope it helped your listeners to understand this isn't about telling them to say no to everybody, which a lot of codependent books do. And I don't believe no is a complete sentence. They also, in increments, I teach people how to say no in ways where you don't even use the word no. You don't have to. You don't even make excuses either. You just say, oh, thank you for thinking of me that I could do that for you, but I'm overextended, but I appreciate you thinking that I could. You have not said the word no. You're genuine to yourself.
But you've said it. It's almost like a sneaky boundary.
It's a gratitude sandwich. Right, it's a very old technique. Yes. Yeah. It works. Yes.
The person on the other end is like, so is that a no?
That's a no. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if they keep at you, then you can just say, I just can't. And you don't, no explanation, no offense, no defense.
And I think the courage comes with time,
It does. It does. And the clarity you gain. Oh my goodness. It's amazing. It's amazing.
So as we round up our time together, Mary, I would love to have you to share 3 anchor points. If you were sitting directly in front of someone right now who was a codependent at any stage in codependency, what 3 things would you really want them to anchor into to shift to a more healthy way of living and relating?
Wow. That's a loaded question. And I trying to make them very concise so I can really, really be of service. Again, not in servitude, but of service. Number 1, and we talked about it earlier, please recognize your childhood dynamics. Don't sugarcoat your childhoods. Many people do that. Number 2, do some research on the neuroscience. Go ahead and look up the vagus nerve. It's VAGUS, and reactivity and trauma bonds. So research your own help. And then do make your don't list. And I hope people will, because every chapter that I have, it gives you, every chapter builds off another, but those don't lists are that's how you find the do. Because so many codependents, they really don't know what they want. They don't know who they are. They have given so much to others. They have lost their identity, their sense of self, their sense of safety if they're in a trauma bond. That's what happened to me. I was in a severely abusive marriage. And it was difficult because I can't be a victim, and I am not a victim. I was previously victimized. Huge dynamic, because if you stay that victim, you will always have that victim mentality. I must have deserved it. I must have done something. No, I was victimized, but I had to allow it. I remember when I wrote a song called It Was All Your Fault, but I only had me to blame when I left. I got the lawyer, the boxes and tape, but it said I finally took responsibility and I could forgive you, and it set me free because I allowed it. I had to take responsibility for my part of it, not accountability, but responsibility for my part, not the whole thing. Not the whole thing. So I want people to understand responsibility is very different than accountability. And you don't need an accountability partner as a codependent because you got plenty of that in your own psyche. Go easy on yourself. And I love something that you said. It's a perfect place to wrap it up for what I would have to make as a point. You said it's a lot of work. I hope this really sets everybody free right now. It's actually less work. That's the secret. It's less work. It's actually less work.
Once you've gone through, it frees you, right?
And the emotional symptoms will feel miserable, but you'll actually be doing less work. Does that make sense?
What I
it's
hear
less
you say,
physical labor.
Yes,
Okay,
you're emotionally doing a lot of work, but it frees you up actually physically in your relationships to not have to do and to be everything for everyone else.
Exactly. You can't be everything for everyone, and you can be some things to some people, but you can't be everything to everybody. So yes, it's actually less work, but it's emotionally, it's the toxicity going away. It's the adrenaline and cortisol working itself out. And for you to get the dopamine and norepinephrine for yourself, not vicariously by giving to others. Codependents get vicarious dopamine when they need their own.
And that's a learned skill.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
Or unlearned if you have to unlearn it from your childhood. Yes.
And, I think as we look at ourselves, we also have to forgive ourselves, I think, for ways that maybe we drew other people in by our need. Like there's this,
oh yes,
there's this, not just them, it's us. That's that responsibility. It's the forgiving ourselves. It's forgiving them. I mean, it's such a, like you said, a blurry line. It's not as straightforward as bad, good, right, wrong.
No, thank you, Gina. I got my eyes welled up. I'm not an emotional person, but I am an empathic person. So I guess I negated my own statement there. But when you mentioned that, it really brought a tear to my eye because people don't have to suffer like this anymore. They just don't have to under any circumstances. They really don't have to. You can be true to yourself without being mean. You can be true to yourself without having to be harsh. And forgiving yourself is the hardest person to forgive. Lighten up on yourself. Lighten up on yourself.
I think that the true transformation starts there.
Yes, it does. And it takes a while to get there. I always tell people, you can come in my office and you can vent. I'll let you vent for 3 or 4 sessions, but then we're going to reinvent at the end of every session. They don't like it. There's resistance at first. I said, if you'll stick with me, I'll let you vent all you want, but we're going to vent and reinvent, vent and reinvent, vent and reinvent. And then you just start going, oh, I'm good with just reinventing. That's beautiful. So yes, and it does. Truly, the real work starts when you forgive yourself, you don't take the blame, and you start moving on toward what you do want in your life.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much, Mary, for having such a heartfelt and practical and kind conversation about such a difficult thing. There was a generosity and a grace to the way that you described it. It wasn't like, you're bad, you need to change, but you brought it in a loving and kind way. And I appreciate that because there is a gentleness and a firmness, I think, that needs to take place. And I feel like you brought that gentleness and firmness to this conversation. And I really appreciated that compassion. Thank you.
That does make me feel good. That's pleasant. That's why I'm not a drug and alcohol counselor, because they say you have to have tough love. And I went, but I can't do that. I have to know what I can't do, right? To know what I can do. Yes. I tough love to me just doesn't come naturally. And to most codependents, it doesn't. So unless you're the fixer type. So thank you. I do want to be gentle with people because I want people to be gentle on themselves. It took me a long time to be gentle to myself and say, it's okay to get a pedicure. I'll never forget when I did. I'm like, I'm actually getting a pedicure. I'm getting a massage. Oh my gosh, I'm spending money on myself. Unheard of. And it's not all the time. You don't go from being, a doormat to to being self-serving, but you have to take time for yourself. Balance, balance, balance. Thank you, Gina, because I do want to be gentle with people. It's not about that. You're already hard enough on yourselves.
Right. Oh, true that. So, Mary, how can people find you?
The book, Codependency, Discovery and Recovery 2.0 will be wherever books are sold. It's on HCI, Life Issues Publisher. You can find it also on Amazon, Indie Books, Books A Million. I have a wonderful publisher who makes it readily available. And it has a lovely bird on the cover with the cage door open, making a decision whether or not it wants to fly out. The door is open. It's your decision if you want to stay this way or you want to go.
The caged bird. That's a great analogy. Well, today, friends, I've been speaking with Mary-Joye. She's a licensed therapist and author of Codependency, Discovery and Recovery 2.0, a holistic approach to healing and freeing yourself. If you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 241, you will find links to Mary-Joye's book and her website. Friends, this is one of those conversations that I feel is important for us because I think we all have these tendencies as women. We can really struggle to do too much for too many. So I hope that you find that this conversation is helpful, not judgmental, finding that gentleness within the conversation to recognize where we might do better, where we might be better, where we might also be better for others by doing less. There's a dance in our relationships. And if we can be better partners in that dance, I think our relationships and our lives will be better. So if you find some resonance with this conversation and you find shades of yourself in what Mary shared today, I would encourage you to grab her book, go through that book, make those lists, and just begin to find maybe better balance in your relationships in the way that you relate to other people. It's not a judgment. It's an opportunity to do better when you know better. So grab a hold of that resource, maybe find a group of friends and go through it together so that you can, maybe have some perspective in the process. In the meantime, my friends, take care of yourselves. Do the things that bring you joy. And remember that midlife really is our best life. We thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to sharing more with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.